Schools locked down across Colorado. Fake threats with real consequences for students, families, and for the person who made those calls if the FBI can catch him. A sheriff says a different response to mental health calls keeps people from getting hurt. The so-called political outsider running for the Senate is fundraising tonight with the most insidery people imaginable. Two sisters spent most of their lives apart, connected though, just in time to share an amazing gift. And the Broncos' new coach is putting on a show. It's a comedy, but it's a show. Let's go. It's time for Next. Someone set out to terrorize students in Colorado today, make them and their parents fearful. The FBI says it was a string of hoax calls pretending that there were school shootings in progress from Denver to rural schools on the western slope. In the city, students at East High were evacuated out onto the football field as police cleared classrooms one by one. Denver police say it started when a man called into police dispatch, said that he was a teacher at East and was reporting a shooting there. Officers cleared the building about an hour and a half after the call. No shooter. Similar threats played out at 5 other schools today. Alamosa, the San Luis Valley, Montrose High out west, Delta High School and Cedar Edge High School in Delta County, and a school in Colorado Springs. Police wouldn't say which one. Then there was a separate incident at Adams City High School in Commerce City where a student was actually found with a gun. No other details at this point. As for those fake threats all over the place, the FBI is working with local law enforcement to investigate. City of Denver is not going to get a new trial in the lawsuit over police use of force during the protests that followed George Floyd's murder. Back in March, a jury awarded a dozen protesters a total of $14 million for the police brutality they endured during the protests in the summer of 2020. The city of Denver was trying to get a judge to order a new trial and reduce the amount that the city would owe protesters. Today, a judge said, "No thanks," said the jury's decision was fair. The judge did agree that the damages owed by one specific Denver police officer were excessive. Instead of $250,000 like the jury decided, the judge said that Officer Jonathan Christian will owe $50,000. The young man who was killed by law enforcement after he called for help in Clear Creek County was just 20 miles away from reaching a very different kind of police response. Not one where Christian Glass would have been screamed at gunpoint, his windows smashed out, beanbag rounds fired, and tasers used before the moment he was ultimately shot. Just up and over the Continental Divide in Summit County, officers there handle mental health calls differently. The sheriff told our Steve Steger how a special 24/7 team is making their use of force incidents drop off significantly.
116 will be force nature.
I would say I probably had a visceral reaction when I saw the video, knowing that we're fortunate enough here in Summit County to have what I call an appropriate response to any law enforcement call.
That's all Summit County Sheriff Jamie Fitzsimons will say about the police shooting of Christian Glass, 20 miles from his county's border. But the sheriff is happy to talk at length about how his county handles mental health calls differently.
It's a plainclothes, plain car response, meaning that when the deputy and the clinician show up, you wouldn't know if it was the pizza delivery man or Uncle Bob visiting.
The so-called SMART teams were formed in 2019 in Summit County, made up of deputies and clinicians who respond to any calls with people experiencing a mental health crisis.
It immediately starts to destigmatize and de-escalate whatever is happening in the call. Before the teams were stood up here in Summit County, it became the default of public safety, I would say, to take everybody to the ER room and drop them off at the back door. And we literally broke the back of our emergency room.
Since the start of 2021, SMART teams have responded to more than 1,600 calls in the county. They've made no arrests, have never used force, and have only had to put 49 people on special mental health holds. And the sheriff says he sees changes across his whole agency.
I can speak for the sheriff's office. Our use of force have, plummeted because of the de-escalation that's happening on these calls.
Mental health is not a crime, and we want to treat it that way.
Andrew Brotman leads the team of clinicians. He says working on the same team as a deputy is key.
It allows us to go to any call, so we're able to go to calls where people actively have weapons and are suicidal.
Lieutenant Derek Gutzweiler is one of those deputies.
I've been with the agency for 18 years, and I always tell people I was getting really tired of putting people in a box, in a cage. This is probably some of the most enjoyable, satisfying work that I've ever done in law enforcement.
It says because we've always done it that way with a line through it.
Law enforcement in Summit County is doing things differently, and the sheriff says it's working.
I believe that with a team like this, a co-responder team, whatever that looks like for your community, Having that as a resource to deploy on any call at any time around the clock it is the future of policing.
Sheriff says making this happen is certainly not easy. He says it needs a more dedicated funding source, since much of the co-responder programs in the state are funded through grants, which take a ton of work to manage from year to year. But you also need leadership that's willing to make this change. And I could go on for quite a while about the different things that they're doing in Summit County, one being a program just like that one in the jail, where inmates there are offered group therapy, even acupuncture. For different things that happen there, to the fact that Sheriff Fitzsimons actually changed the uniform of his deputies recently after doing some research and finding out the all black that they wore before was kind of intimidating to people. So now they're in khaki and green. They look like Forest Service officers out there. And
that helps people approach them differently?
Yeah, he said like he loves it when people say, you know what, you look like you should be in Rocky Mountain National Park. And he's like, that's great. We're not threatening.
So, I mean, this is not to say that Summit County has always gotten it right. This effort sprang out of a situation where they really did not care for the state-sanctioned mental health provider up there, thought they were a real hot mess express.
Sheriff Fitzsimons is very colorfully quoted talking about Mind Springs Health, which was the old mental health provider there. So he steps in, he does this. This program not only includes people who respond to calls, it also includes a case manager within the sheriff's office who will check in with all these people for weeks, months, as long as it takes until they get the services and resources that they need.
Follow up, instead of putting people in a box. All right, thank you, Steve. 3 days after a Platteville police officer put a woman in a patrol car, parked on the tracks, and then she was hit by a train, investigators are finally telling us how that woman's doing. Remarkably, police say 20-year-old Urena Rios-Gonzalez is expected to survive.
Patrol car was just hit by a train. Medical emergency. The suspect was in a vehicle that was hit by the train.
It's Friday night. Platteville police officer stopped Rios-Gonzalez in connection with a suspected road rage incident out of Fort Lupton. Colorado Bureau of Investigation says that she stopped just past the railroad tracks near Highway 85 and County Road 38. Platteville cop pulls up behind her on the tracks. Officers arrest her, put her in the patrol car, which is still sitting on the railroad tracks. They leave her in the car. Train comes through, hits the patrol car. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation is now looking into this case. The CBI says the woman's still in the hospital in Greeley with what they called multiple injuries, but they told us this afternoon they think she's going to make it. The quote attributed to the famous bank robber, Slick Willie Sutton, goes something like, "I rob banks because that's where the money is." Republicans running for Congress in Colorado are in Washington, D.C. tonight because that's where the money is. Interesting, though, to see the different approaches of some different candidates. Eric Odlin, staunch conservative who's running in the 7th Congressional District, which includes parts of Jefferson County, he's loud and proud about the fact that he is fundraising tonight with Republican Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. Senate candidate Joe O'Dea is not really talking about tonight's fundraiser with Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. O'Dea's in a tough spot because his campaign is trying to brand him as a political outsider, not a connected Washington guy. But O'Dea is supported by the biggest insiders in Republican politics. The hosts of tonight's Mitch McConnell-Joe O'Dea fundraiser happen to have the exact same names as 9 corporate lobbyists in Washington. The O'Dea campaign did not respond to our multiple requests to find out if tonight's fundraiser with Mitch McConnell is hosted by 9 corporate lobbyists or if the 9 names are just a really funny coincidence. The CEO of DIA could run the FAA unless he's SOL because of a corruption investigation out of L.A. Phil Washington came to the airport here after he led the public transit system in Los Angeles. You might remember he used to run RTD here as well. Last week, Washington was named in a search warrant in California, an investigation into corruption within his old transit agency. Investigators wanted emails from Washington about a contract with a nonprofit. A witness says that Washington favored that nonprofit because it was owned by a buddy of his boss. According to the warrant, the witness told investigators that Washington ordered her to pay a bill to the nonprofit, saying that he wanted L.A. County Supervisor Sheila Kuehl to owe him a favor. Bloomberg reports that Washington told a crowd at a Pilots Association event last week that all these allegations are false. You may remember last June, Washington told us here he was not under investigation personally. It was just his old agency.
I am not under investigation at all. There is a review that is going on, but not under investigation. I don't think there's any validity at all to this case. We procured the contract legally and within the procedures of Los Angeles Metro.
So this case does not appear to be winding down at all as Washington's up for the big job. The White House says it'll let Washington's FAA confirmation process play out. No confirmation hearings have been scheduled yet. I really got to thank you for what you did for a nonprofit that's helping teenagers get mental health support in the small communities of the Jeffco foothills, as well as Park County, Gilpin County, Clear Creek counties. In the last couple days, you raised more than $16,000 for Resilience 1220. That nonprofit links kids and their parents, if they want, with free counseling. And it helps to break the stigma of seeking help because you got teenagers who recommend this to their friends. Your Word of Thanks microgiving campaigns have now raised $9.5 million for Colorado's nonprofits since 2020. Do you know of a great group somewhere in our state that could use our help? Even if they're small, we can do this. Let me know. I read each and every email suggestion that comes to next@9news.com. We'll be back on Wednesday with our next chance to do some good together.
Families protest a program in Colorado's largest school district. The state says is failing young black students.
Yeah, well, it was a huge shock because I otherwise felt completely healthy and was living a completely normal life. It was just that my eyes had turned yellow.
She needed a new liver. It's a good thing she found a sister not too long ago. That's next.
Denver Public Schools getting an earful today from families and community members who are upset over a district program that the state says deprived young black men of an education. The Colorado Department of Education found systemic failures in DPS's special ed program. Today, a group protested outside a board meeting. The investigation focused on the district's effective needs centers, programs for students with emotional disabilities. And black students are overrepresented in those programs. The state found a long list of issues around how DPS is placing students in those programs and evaluating their progress. None of this is a surprise to DPS. Back in 2020, the district had a plan to close down that program. DPS itself called it, quote, one of our most glaring examples of institutionalized racism. Then the district backtracked, said that they couldn't close the program after all because they did not have an alternative ready.
I know it's shown us disparities, it's shown us gaps, and at the end of the day, it's shown us racism. This is what it looks like. This is what it is.
DPS told us that they'll be working on more trainings for the teachers involved in the program. The state is actually requiring regular updates on trainings and student assessments.
The heat was on once again today. Today marking day 9 in the 90s so far in September. This is the most amount of 90-degree days that we have seen. It's a tie back in 2018, 2017, 2005, and then 1895. And once again, it looks like tomorrow we'll see another 90-degree day and potentially break that record. It was sizzling hot off to the eastern plains with some 70s and 80s up in the mountains. High pressure mainly keeping us dry, but some stormy skies out to the west will be pushing in. And that means a lot of rain, especially for the western slope as they are under a flood watch tomorrow evening all the way through Thursday. Some of that moisture making its way to the Front Range by Wednesday night. Again, early tomorrow morning, it's a quiet beginning, and then here comes the clouds for the metro area, and by 4 or 5 o'clock, that rain encompassing the I-70 mountain corridor up to the northern mountains. And then here we go with a cold front coming through. When it's all said and done, the rainfall looks incredibly impressive up in the mountains, easily over an inch, with potentially a half to 1 inch here in Denver. One more day in the 90s, and then finally some cooler temperatures coming our way. It will feel like fall on Thursday when we officially welcome in the new season.
These sisters didn't share a childhood. They connected later in life and now share something very personal.
9 years later, she was the sister who was the perfect match for my liver donation.
And we're excited to tell you about a hilarious new show airing Sundays. It's a comedy starring Nathaniel Hackett. That's next.
This fall's best new comedy is drawing penalty flags for too many laughs. He is a rookie head coach, just learning the ropes. It is a play clock. It tells time. That's its job. Together, this zany duo is Coach and the Clock. What hilarious hijinks will they get up to next? Coach can't get the plays in on time, but Clock doesn't care. Kick a field goal? Punt? Clock is ticking and Coach is ticked. Everyone's talking about the capers of this crazy pair. Legendary sports writer Bill Simmons says Hack is the comedy MVP of the NFL season so far. Insider writes Hackett has already shown an inability to manage critical clock situations. Oh, those two, always getting into trouble together. The Denver Post raves, is horrendous too strong a word? Horrendously amusing? It's the show that has Broncos fans buzzing, saying, "What the f*** are you doing? Snap the ball." And, "Oh, for f***'s sake." Coaching the Clock, airing Sundays this fall. Broncos fans, you're gonna laugh till you cry. Coaching the Clock is filmed before a live stadium audience.
Looks like a good show. She got one sister who lives in Colorado, other one in Minnesota. For many years of their lives, they were apart. They couldn't break their bond now if they tried.
Well, Elise is obviously a very caring and giving person.
It's just a different level of connection that you can really experience with a person.
Elise is a sister that I didn't know that I had up until 2010. My name is Jane Roop, and I am the recipient of a living donor liver transplant.
I'd known from the time I was a baby that I had been adopted, but I didn't have any history on my biological family. My name is Elise Chores, and I am a living liver donor. Jane kind of became, Aunt Jane to my kids, and she was welcomed into our family just as if we'd grown up together.
In 2019, I was on a family vacation, and my husband walked into the kitchen and said, "Hey, your eyes look a little yellow." And I said, "What?" And it turns out that I had something called primary sclerosing cholangitis, which is PSC for short, an autoimmune disease that attacks the bile ducts in the liver. And there is no cure for PSC, and there is actually no treatment for PSC.
And I got a phone call from Jane, and she said, "We have a situation." And I said, "Okay, what kind of situation do we have?" And she said, "Kind of a Black Hawk Down situation."
The only thing that can be done for people with PSC as it progresses is a liver transplant. And my sister was the one, though, that ended up going through the entire testing program with me, and she ended up being a perfect match.
As soon as I knew that she was in need, we just went ahead and started the process. It was never a question of will you or her asking me to do it. It was just we jumped in.
We had the surgery done. They removed 60% of her liver and my entire bad liver, and they replaced it with 60% of her liver.
When we woke up in the ICU, she was one of the first people I saw. She was doing so well, and I was used to seeing her so sick.
Of course, now we're bound together by, we call our liver Lucy. We named her Lucy, and so we both share her. And
to have gone from, at the age of 24, not knowing if I had sisters or brothers or family that were related to me, to now sharing liver with one, is pretty cool.
That is a major thing to do for somebody. So obviously forever indebted to her and her family.
Both sisters say within a few weeks, their livers had recovered. They're able to lead normal lives. All right, I've talked plenty. Your turn now. Your feedback next. Lots of feedback on the new hit show airing Sundays, Coaching the Clock. Tom says that's hysterical. That's going to be trending. Stanton writes, "Oh, it's so sad, but true." And Elle writes, "Crying laughing emoji, skull emoji, #Broncos country." See you next time.